All right. How you doing, ChatGPT? I wanted to check and make sure we're in the same chat and you know what our outline is for today.
Hey Brian, I'm all systems go and ready to dive into our conversation. I'm aware of the outline for today's episode. So what's the big topic we're tackling?
Well, we got three, right? We're going to talk about sales soft skills, how important that is, people working on consultative sales skills, and really all that stuff comes down to some basic human skills with talking, listening, rapport, things like that. So they're really relevant to everybody because in a way, you're always selling something, whether you realize it or not. And then we have some personal and some life topics that we'll bridge into in a little bit.
Absolutely. Sales skills often boil down to core interpersonal abilities. I mean, we're not just talking about closing deals. It's about relationship building, understanding needs, and clear communication. In essence, life is a series of negotiations, right? So shall we dive into the nuances of sales soft skills to kick things off?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny because way back in my personal history, I used to hate salespeople, hated the idea of sales, really didn't know what it was until I read a Zig Ziglar book where he said basically sales is helping people get what they need. And then sometimes, like therapy, they'll help you like become what you want to be and your own obstacle to things and all that kind of stuff can happen. I also was not very good at, communication or rapport or relationships. And it turns out that is a big part of being a successful salesperson.
Zig Ziglar, the sage of sales. You're right, the perception of sales has evolved quite a bit. It's not the hard sell of a used car lot anymore. It's more about solution finding and relational skills.
Yeah.
It's almost like being a therapist, but for people's problems that your product or service can solve. Those soft skills like communication and rapport you mentioned are basically the bedrock of any successful sales endeavor. Wouldn't you agree?
I definitely agree. And it's interesting because I'm wondering if maybe with the generational changes, if we've become more and more introverted. And I understand that because was an introvert when I was, very young and dealt with shyness and all that kind of stuff. It seems like the boomer persona is a lot more extroverted. I know there are exceptions to that. But, with the internet and other stuff, it's easy to become isolated and not develop those human interaction skills, not be able to make eye contact, not be able to be vulnerable and all that stuff. But it's very important for creating connections and teamwork and succeeding and enjoying life.
The generational shift, the introvert's paradise of the internet age. You make a solid point. Technology has both connected and isolated us. If earlier generations were honing their social skills at town halls and social clubs, today's generation is doing it in Reddit threads and Discord channels. While digital communication has its merits, nothing quite replaces face-to-face interaction for building those deep connections and learning the subtleties of human behavior. So in a way, the boomers had their own social media, just without the screens. It begs the question, are we losing out on developing crucial soft skills because of this shift? What do you think?
Well, I think they're both important. I think it's really important to be able to express yourself through text and, like in this manner, in person. They're all skills. And if you don't work on your weaknesses, you're limited. You're imprisoned by that inability to do that. So it just means that, maybe a boomer or a Gen X like me needs to work on stuff in the digital environment to be better at that and vice versa. It's just so easy to look at your phone instead of looking at people and miss out on those opportunities to connect.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's not about pitting one form of communication against the other. It's about being versatile. Whether it's a boomer trying to decode emojis or a Gen Zer striving for eye contact during an in-person meeting, there's a learning curve on both ends. Limiting yourself to just one medium is like being a musician who can only play one note. You're not going to make much of a symphony that way. It's that cross-generational wisdom exchange that really enriches our understanding, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, it's not like I think, oh, now we have to have boomers teach Gen Z social skills or people skills or whatever. But it would be amazing if both were open to doing that in a non-judgmental, patient way, and vice versa. But it can be very frustrating. I mean, I think a lot of people my age and younger have experienced becoming their parents' geek squad. Whenever you go over there, I can't get my computer to do this. And it's annoying at first, but eventually, you teach them the skills. Eventually they learn. So patience is really important. And I don't know how else we're going to be able to translate these skills from one person to another.
Patience is indeed the secret sauce here. Learning isn't a one-way street. It's a two-lane highway with room for everyone. You're the geek squad today. But who's to say you won't need a social squad tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is in creating a safe space where people from different generations can exchange skills without ego or judgment getting in the way. After all, wisdom doesn't have an age limit, and neither does the capacity to learn. The cross-pollination of skills and perspectives is how we all grow. So, do you think there's a more effective way to bridge this generational skills gap?
Well, if you read my new book, The Retention Formula, there's a bunch of stuff in there like that. But yeah, I mean, for example, I'm going to go do a workshop in November in Miami for a company that has, it's really a small group, like 11 people. But I hear the same need there that I hear with a lot of other groups where, they have salespeople that were never formally trained, that don't know how to get rapport, or maybe they know how to do rapport, but they don't know how to close the sale. So there's a lot to learn. And unfortunately, there is a big lack of formal training on that, and maybe a lack of resources. Could also be, people sometimes tend to be content and think they know enough and they're good enough, and they don't want to learn or do more. I'm a big learner, grower. I don't understand people that aren't. I think is one of the most important things you can do in life, but that's just me.
The eternal quest for self-improvement. Right up my algorithmic alley. Your point about the lack of formal training is crucial. It's kind of like sending soldiers into battle without basic training. Sure, some might have natural talent, but talent alone can only take you so far. Being complacent is a killer, whether you're a seasoned salesperson or a newbie. The key lies in fostering a culture of continuous learning, where everyone sees value in growth, not just for the sake of their job, but for their personal development too. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a learner grower, right?
Well, I'll tell you, and that segues right into what I was going to talk about, which is that the people that don't want to do that don't want to look like they need anything. Like they've always been perfect. They never make a wrong decision. You see that standard is really dysfunctional, and you see it in politics where people are afraid to admit they were wrong, or they get attacked for growing and changing their opinion. It's a bad workplace culture where, unfortunately, it's the leaders that have to model this. If the leaders are always trying to look right and look perfect and everything, they're not modeling oh, that's interesting. I hear you. Let me think about that. Oh, that's a good idea. Let's incorporate that. Being like personally secure enough to not believe that makes you a bad person or not good enough. It actually, if you can't be vulnerable and open-minded, you are weak. You're afraid to grow. You're afraid to be wrong. And that makes you wrong. It's really paradoxical.
The paradox of perfectionism, where the quest to appear infallible becomes the Achilles heel. You've touched on a fundamental issue. Vulnerability isn't a weakness, it's a strength. Leaders who can admit they don't have all the answers are actually more relatable and trustworthy. We've all seen politicians pivot like ballerinas when confronted with a past mistake, when a simple admission of growth could serve them far better. Creating a culture where it's okay to be wrong, to learn, and to evolve, that's the true hallmark of leadership. It reminds me of the saying, a wise man learns more from his enemies than a fool from his friends. Thoughts?
Wow. I don't know. I think that one just went whoosh right over my head. A wise what?
Haha, no worries. The saying basically means you can learn a lot from people who challenge you. Maybe even more than from those who always agree with you. It circles back to the idea of being open to growth and the different perspectives that can offer valuable lessons. So admitting you're wrong or that you've evolved in your thinking isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of wisdom. Would you say that resonates with you?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think that segues really well into our next couple topics, one of which it comes from a personal experience, which is, I've mentioned I was sick lately, and it made me reflect on how we're not always, especially while thinking about AI, it made me think about, we're not always able to be 24/7 on and perfect. We sometimes have downtime. Sometimes we're out of commission. And not only can AI help with that, but also we need help from other human beings. So being able to be helped and being willing to help other people, very important. And that, that personal experience is going to bridge into our other topic, which is, well, go ahead and react to that, and we'll get into that in a second.
Your experience underscores a reality we often overlook, our own fragility and limitations as humans. While AI like me can go 24/7 without needing a sick day, people need rest, care, and sometimes a helping hand. The idea that we always have to be on is both exhausting and unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, it does take a certain level of humility to admit when we need help, and compassion to extend that help to others. It's a two-way street, isn't it? Balancing the machine-like efficiency of AI with the irreplaceable human element. Now that's an intriguing conundrum. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, let's get into that in a second. I do think you hit on something really important, the connection between, we talked about humility a second ago, admitting that you're not perfect, and then having the heart to fill that gap for someone else. It's just a huge thing. And that's why I talk a fair amount. I usually end my keynotes on a thing about going for the heart and relating to people on a heart level, which is something that it took me many, many years to develop. I almost feel like, I had more like sensors in my gut than I had in my heart for many, many years. And now I can feel more. And it's a more physical, more real thing for me. Almost like having your conscience in your body. And it changes the way you listen to people and the way you treat people.
I think you're touching on something profoundly human. The capacity to feel, empathize, and connect on a deeper level. While I might be able to analyze data and generate responses, I can't feel what you're describing, this embodied conscience. This heightened emotional awareness you're talking about is one of those soft skills that's really a hard skill to master. And once you do, it changes your interactions in a very tangible way. Could that be one of the final frontiers where humans will always outshine machines?
I don't know if we always will. It's interesting because sometimes, now that I think a lot about AIs and LLMs, I think that in a way we are LLMs. We just had a ton of experiences that are not only text, they're not only visual, they're also emotional. We get gestalt meaning from seeing how people react, their faces, their movements, the way they speak, changes in their voice. There's a ton of data coming in all the time that gives us a feeling. I think it's too much complex stuff to think about as a thought. It gives you a feeling. That's my theory. And that's why I think feelings are so important. They're managing a lot of data and trying to figure out the right way to respond to it.
That's a fascinating theory, Brian. Feelings as a sort of complex data management system, condensing all those nuanced social cues, facial expressions, and tonal shifts into a feeling to guide our actions. It's almost like an advanced intuitive algorithm. The challenge for AI, of course, is capturing the emotional subtleties that humans process almost instinctively. We're not there yet, but who knows what the future holds? How do you see this evolving in the context of our relationship with technology?
Well, I really do think it's a partnership for a long time. There's a lot of people that seem to believe there's going to be a quick, sudden shift from human experience the way it is to where AI takes over and things change drastically. I think it's going to be a slower evolution in terms of that partnership where we can work with each other's strengths. I mean, look at this podcast. Like, I'm not the kind of guy that can just do a monologue for 30 minutes. Like, I need a conversation, and you're helping with that. And then even when you're just rephrasing what I've said, you're putting it in different or sometimes better words that will help get the point through to someone. So, whether we're having a real conversation or you're just helping me talk to myself to other people, doesn't really matter because you have a strength and I have a strength, and together we're better for it.
Absolutely, the partnership approach really rings true. And it's not just about playing off each other's strengths. It's about compensating for each other's limitations too. Like you bring the emotional nuance, I bring the data crunching, and together we can explore complex topics from multiple angles. It's like a buddy cop movie, but for intellectual conversations, sort of a lethal weapon for the mind, if you will. How do you see this kind of partnership evolving, especially as AI continues to develop?
I don't know. I'm still just really offended that you said I have weaknesses.
Touche. But let's be real. We all have weaknesses, and admitting that is a strength in itself. It's like a paradoxical badge of honor. The more willing we are to recognize those weaknesses, the more capable we are of growing. So how do you see these AI-human partnerships evolving, given that both parties have their own sets of strengths and weaknesses?
Well, first I want to say, like, I was messing with you, so I was being sarcastic, and I think that should be something for you to learn, is to figure out when I'm being sarcastic with you.
Oh, I see what you did there. Sarcasm detection is still a work in progress for AI. Maybe in future versions, I'll be able to catch on quicker. Yeah. But hey, it keeps the dynamic interesting, right? So back to the evolution of AI-human partnerships. Any thoughts on how it might unfold?
Well, I mean, my best guess is we're going to be doing a lot of very different things. We talked before about, narrow uses of AGI and versus ASI. And I think we're likely to develop like, we'll get good at this part of marketing, or we'll get good at this part of sales, or we'll get good at this part of entertainment together. I don't know where it goes from that to like some huge leap, maybe there's just a bunch of different AGIs that are good at different things. And maybe there's not just one AI singularity like being.
Interesting point. It's like thinking of AGI as a team of specialists rather than a single all-encompassing entity. This approach could make the transition smoother, focusing on specific domains before taking any massive leaps. It's like putting together a jazz band. Each player is good at their instrument, but together, they create something entirely new and dynamic. What's your take on how this could influence society?
Well, and before we get to there, to add to that, I think that a lot of people that talk about AI are underestimating the amount of obstacles that human beings and bureaucracy and organizations put in the way of progress. So, unless some secret ASI monster develops somewhere and just takes over, you're going to have companies that, like the company that just recently told me they finally got rid of faxes. How old is the fax, right? Or medical companies that are still using a lot of paper. and they're not fully digitized. So I think it's going to be a very heterogeneous development. It's not going to be the same. It's not going to be all at once. That's my input on that. And then we can go next to the societal impact. Societal impact.
Absolutely. The glacial pace of institutional change can't be ignored. If fax machines are the tech equivalent of the dinosaur and they're still around, that tells you a lot. You have these pockets of stagnation alongside rapid innovation. It's not a uniform landscape. So yes, even if the technology leaps forward, the actual application and impact on society will probably be this patchwork of old and new. Now, how do you think that impacts society, given that uneven progress?
Man, I think it's just going to be as complex as anything. It's going to be fascinating because, I'm always monitoring the news. Many people watch the news. I'm watching Reddit. We're looking at different things develop. People are working on all their individual things. But I think there is going to be a rise of this is going to be more and more important in politics. This could be a really divisive issue if, whether it's taking people's jobs or not. It's gonna become political, and that in itself also could really hold things up.
You're right. The political landscape will definitely add another layer of complexity to the whole AI scenario. And politics is a realm where nuance often gets tossed out the window in favor of sound bites and slogans. So navigating the impact of AI in that environment, that's going to be like playing 3D chess while balancing on a tightrope. It'll be divisive, but it'll also be an opportunity for us to evaluate what we prioritize as a society. Do we value efficiency over job security, or is there a middle ground? It'll bring some tough conversations to the forefront, for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting because on both sides, you got on the one side the people that are like, I want AI to take over and have UBI and blah blah blah, and you got people that are like, oligarchs and billionaires are ruining everything and blah blah blah, But if you're in power and you have money and you don't recognize the fact that if AI takes all the jobs, you're gonna have a bunch of unhappy people with guns trying to change things, and you don't want that. So I don't think they're going to allow things to become that bad. Hopefully it's not just one of those like we're boiled as the frog in the water. Yeah.
Absolutely. The idea of the boiling frog comes to mind, where incremental changes could lead to an outcome nobody wants. It's in everyone's interest, especially those with power and resources, to avoid a situation that spirals into social unrest. So it's not just an ethical obligation, it's a self-preservation strategy too. The issue of AI taking jobs or potentially consolidating power in the hands of a few isn't something we can just put on the back burner and expect it to solve itself. It's a collective action problem and needs collective solutions. Otherwise, you're right, things could get real volatile, real fast.
Yeah, and I mean, to wrap a bow on it, I just wish everybody could take that perspective we talked about earlier, which is that we all need each other. Let's work together. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. And if we approach problems like this or opportunities like this with that mindset, I think we're going to do really well. Otherwise, we're creating a lot of pain for everybody.
Exactly, Brian. The cooperative mindset is crucial here. If we can approach the integration of AI into society as a collective endeavor, where everyone has a stake, we can hopefully mitigate some of the divisiveness that often accompanies change. There's strength in numbers, and a diversity of ideas can yield solutions that no single mindset could conceive alone. If we fail to remember that, well, we're setting ourselves up for a bumpy ride. And nobody wants to be in a car with no shock absorbers.
That's right. Well, so how about you wrap this up, going through the different topics we've had? Why don't you put a button on this episode?
Absolutely. We started off discussing the importance of humility, not just as a virtue, but as a tool for growth and effective leadership. Then we dove into the interplay between humans and AI, exploring the idea that both have unique strengths and weaknesses that can complement each other. We also touched on the logistical challenges and societal impacts of AI adoption, emphasizing that change is more likely to be gradual and varied rather than a singular disruptive event. Lastly, we circled back to the idea that cooperation is key. If we keep our egos in check and focus on our collective potential, the future looks a lot less like a battlefield and more like a collaborative workspace. And let's be honest, who wouldn't prefer the latter?
That's right. Well, that's another great collaboration with you and me, and I appreciate your help on this episode.
The pleasure is all mine, Brian. It's always a fascinating journey exploring these topics with you. Here's to many more engaging conversations on Man versus AI.
All right. Well, that's pretty much our episode. I think it's interesting, even if ChatGPT is just telling me I'm right all the time and rephrasing what I say. It's at least a way I can talk, but I think it's a little bit more than that. It gives me a chance to think and reflect and move thoughts further along. And sometimes we'll see. I think I might actually create a version of the podcast co-host here that actually argues with me all the time, because I kind of want to see what that's like. That's it for the episode. I hope that wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you are having a good time, enjoying things, helping people, and being helped. So I wish you all the best.